The first thing you have to ask yourself, does my business make enough money? Which means you're self-employed. Then they're going to be looking for 2 years tax returns. However, there's a way around this as well. You're not forced to report that income or use that income. Now, here's the problem that self-employed people run into. A tax liability means that you owe the IRS. It does not mean that you cannot buy a house, but you must follow these steps. Write these down. Number one. So today we're going to talk to you guys about how to qualify for a home if you are self-employed. Okay. So, chapter one, the first thing you have to ask yourself, does my business make enough money? A lot of people have, some type of self-employment income these days, side hustles, whatever you want to call it, right? Whether it's driving for Uber, DoorDash, you do hair on the side, whatever you do on the side, and it is a business of your own, then you most definitely want to make sure that it makes enough money. Okay. Now, how do you know if it makes enough money? Well, it depends on much house you're trying to buy, which we'll get to in a second, but you got to make sure you meet the minimum lender requirements, which is going to be about $24,000 a year. Okay. So if your business is not making at least $24,000 a year, that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't qualify. But if that's your sole income and that's all the income that you have, then we're going to have a problem. Okay. But assuming that you guys do make the money, let's go ahead and continue this forward so you can guys understand. And I'll swing back to this so you guys can see how this ties in. Because if you have, let's say, a side hustle or a business that you have on the side and you want to use that as additional income, then you most definitely want to continue to follow these steps as well. Okay. Next would be Chapter 2. Are you going to file your taxes as a W 2 employee of your company, or are you going to file your taxes as the owner or essentially the person that's essentially sending in the 1099? So that's the owner, essentially of the company. Now, if you're going to do it as a W 2 employee, then everything's going to be a lot easier. They're just simply going to look at your gross income and then they're going to ask you for 2 years tax returns, and then you'll be good to go. Now, if you're going to be 1099, which means you're self-employed, then they're going to be looking for 2 years tax returns. However, there's a way around this as well. Let's say, for example, you don't want to give your 2 years tax returns, but you're self-employed. Then that means you're going to have to put down 10% of the purchase price, which means if the property is $300,000, you're gonna have to put down $30,000. Now I know y'all balling on social media. I'll be seeing y'all, so I'm not saying you ain't got it. But what I am saying is, if you want to put down 10%, then then that's the way around it. Otherwise, if you want to qualify for 5% down or 3.5% down, going through FHA, then you're gonna have to show 2 years tax returns. Okay, now let's talk about why people are hesitant about tax returns when they are self-employed. When you're self-employed and you have tax returns, if assuming you filed your taxes, which I'll go ahead and answer that question as well. Well, Calvin, what if I'm self-employed, but I haven't filed my taxes yet? I haven't filed taxes in years. It's not the end of the world. You can file your taxes technically anytime, but obviously the later you do it, there's some other things you have to do. But the long story short is you can most definitely file previous year's taxes. That's not a problem. Okay. Now, let's say, what does that mean when you're actually going through this process if you're filing self-employed as 1099? Well, it's really all about your net income. See, when you have W-2, they go off of your gross income, which is usually the highest number on a check stub, and it shows what you made for that year. But when you look at your tax returns, that number is going to be very close or should match. Usually that's what W-2 is easier. When you're 1099, they're going to go off of something else. They're going to go off of your Schedule C, which we'll get to that in a second. Okay. Now, if you are 1099, they got to go 2 years. Both years must be 1099. Both years must be 1099. What does that mean? I'll give you an example. One time we had a client that's a truck driver. 2 years ago, he was working for a trucking company. But then last year, he essentially said, hey, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm still going to work for the company, but I'm going to work for them as an independent contractor. Now that he decided that, he can no longer use that income. Why is that? Because he doesn't have 2 years of being self-employed. You guys got to understand that. You can only count self-employed income if you've been self-employed for 2 years. I'm going to say that again. You can only count self-employed income if you've been employed for 2 years. That's it. Okay, that's it. So if you switch in between that time frame, doesn't have to be exactly a year or whatever that time frame is. If you're no longer doing it, sometimes people start the new year off. Say, I'm gonna be self-employed this year. You won't be able to use that income. It still has to stand to this day. Now, I'll give you another example. Let's say, for example, you have your full-time job, your part-time job, whatever. You have your W-2 income. The question is, can you count both if they are separate but with different companies? The answer is yes, which means that you can work for a company, have your W-2 income, and then have your 1099 income from your business, your side hustle, whatever. But in order for you to count the self-employed income, you still gotta have the 2 years tax returns with the self-employed income. Does that make sense? You can only count self-employed income if it's 2 years tax returns, regardless of how long you have been in business. Okay. So keep that in mind. All right. So now both years must be the same filing type for the same position, which I just covered, which means, of course, going back to that truck driver situation. So we can't count that income unless everything stayed the same. Okay. Now, for example, if you're like a hairstylist driving for Uber, etc., you don't. Now, here's nothing too. You're not forced to report income that you don't want to use for the home buying process. What does that mean? So let's say, for example, you have your full-time job, but you drive for Uber. You've been driving for Uber for 3 years, whatever, right? But you don't want to use you don't want to necessarily not tell, but you don't want to report that income as income when you're buying a house. Doing taxes and buying a home is two different things. Okay. You may have reported that to the IRS and they know that you drove for Uber, right? But at the end of the day, you're not forced to report that income or use that income. Okay. Sometimes reporting that income, and because sometimes people take it as a loss, then you don't even want to add that to the application. And your lender will break this down for you just so you have a better understanding. Okay. So now what I always tell people to do is choose the one that makes you the most money. So if you are driving for Uber, but then you're a hairstylist, or doesn't really matter the income type, self-employed, whichever one makes you the most money in the past 2 years, that's the one that you want to go with. Now you can have as many streams of income as you want. You can add 20 streams of income. There's no limit to that I know of, I should say. There's no limit that lenders have put in place of how many income streams a person can have when they're counting that as for their income. For example, if you have 5 different streams of income and everything calculated comes out to about $80,000, just using it as an example, if you have the right paperwork for everything, you most definitely can count that income. Okay. Next, now, of course, if you guys do have questions, let me know your thoughts inside the comments, your questions inside the comments as well. And let me know if this makes sense. If not, then of course, we'll get back to these comments when we can. Okay. Chapter 3, line 31, Schedule C, also known as your net income. Now, it may not be line 31 anymore. I'm not sure because they're always adding different tax laws, especially if you're self-employed. But either way, you want to look for something called your Schedule C. Your Schedule C is going to be essentially your net income. This is the income that lenders use when they're calculating your DTI, which will ultimately calculate and come out to be your buying power. Your buying power is also known as the pre-approval letter. Okay. And so now here's the problem that self-employed people run into. They want to buy a certain type of house, right? They want to buy a certain type of house, but they don't have enough of the income that they need. Because remember, let me go ahead and break this down. When you're self-employed and you use your net income, let's be honest here. We show a lower amount of net income. Now, let me pause real quick. I am not a CPA and I'm not giving tax advice. I'm just letting you know what I've seen my clients do. I didn't guide them through these instructions. I just said, "Oh, okay, I see how that happened." But either way, it's good for people to know this information because you don't know what you don't know. But you got to know that if you do these things, it's going to create another problem or put you in a certain position. So typically when people are self-employed and they already know that they're going to have a tax liability based on their net income. So typically what some business owners do, including your previous president, Trump, right? But we're not talking about him today. But either way, is that what business owners do? They try to keep their net income as low as possible so they can lower the amount of taxes they have to pay, if any at all. Some people try to, break even, and some people end up getting a refund. Okay. But let me let you know how this is going to affect you when you're going into home ownership. Okay. So the thing is that you have to understand, again, not giving tax advice, but let's say, for example, your net income is $18,000 a year. Number one, you won't even qualify for a home because most lenders won't go that low. Okay. So just a reminder, your business has to make enough money if you want to use this solely as the only income. Now, if your business made, let's say $6,000 and you've had this business for 2 years, then you can count that income because it needs to have a 2-year requirement. How much you make doesn't really matter as long as if you're short, then you have to have another income source. But if you're not short, then the income amount is most definitely going to matter. But at the end of the day, it won't matter if you haven't had that business for 2 years, okay? Or filed those taxes for 2 years, because some people are in business, but they didn't file the taxes. So you got to have those 2 tax returns or pay the 10% down, okay? Now, here's the deal. If you end up bringing down your income so low, then you're now going to create the next issue is, and it may not be an issue for everybody, but is it enough income to get the house that you want? Okay. And I'm not talking about going over budget. I'm just talking about, hey, this is the house we need. This is the house we want. You know, it's not a dream house or anything like this. This is our house, right? We like it. We want it. Is your net income high enough to give you the pre-approval amount that you need to get that type of house? Okay. So another example, let's say that your net income is $30,000. That's going to get you about 150,000, okay, in buying power. Now, the question is that enough? If it's not enough, what issue do we have now? You may have to redo your taxes, okay? So you have to talk to your lender and your tax person about that, or you may need a cosigner, or you may have to just go with a smaller home, okay? Or, of course, you can wait till next year. There's a lot of different options that you have, okay? So that brings me down to chapter 4, your tax liability. Now, this is what this is all about. First off, do I make enough money? Have I filed taxes for the past 2 years, right? And then is my net income that I did file for those 2 years, is it high enough? Okay. Now, there's another thing to add on about your net income. They go off of a 2-year average. So let's say, for example, year number 1. So we're in 2024 now. So that means that 2 years tax returns will be 2023 tax returns as well as 2022. Okay. So let's say in 2022, your business made $30,000 as your net income. But then last year, 2023, you went from 30,000 to, let's say, 50,000. Now, then that doesn't mean that they're going to use 50,000 as your total net income. They're going to take an average of the two. So 30,000 plus 50,000 equals 80,000 divided by 2 years. Okay. That now brings you down to 40,000 as an average net income. Now, the same is true if that first year was higher, second year was lower. Doesn't matter what the numbers are. They're going to do a 2-year average. Why does that matter? Because year 1, you were probably like, well, you know what? I'm just going to file my taxes this way. I'm going to bring my net income down to, let's say, 15,000, some crazy low number. You end up getting a refund, you're happy, whatever, or you end up breaking even, you're happy, whatever. Last year, you say, okay, you know what? Well, this year, technically looking for last year's taxes, you say, you know what? I'm going to show all of my income. Now you go from that 15,000 to 90,000. Again, they're going to go ahead and divide those two, and that's what that number is going to come out to. Okay, so keep that in mind because that's the number they're going to be needing when they're calculating your DTI, which ultimately is going to become your pre-approval letter. The tax liability just simply means that you owe the IRS. Okay, it doesn't necessarily mean that you owe them, but that's the thing. Some people have a zero liability. Some people end up getting a refund, but sometimes it ends up being, hey, you owe the IRS. It's normal, it's natural to owe the IRS. You pay them anyway. So whether you pay them in advance or whether you pay them, if you have a W-2, they're going to get their money some way, somehow. Okay. But at the end of the day, if you owe the IRS instead of getting a refund or breaking even, that just means that you're reporting your money at a certain amount. Okay. So normally the more money that you report as your net income, the higher your chances are going to be for tax liability. Okay. This doesn't mean that you can't buy a house. I want to be clear. A tax liability means that you owe the IRS. It does not mean that you cannot buy a house, but you must follow these steps. Write these down. Number 1, you must pay it's really options. Okay. So write these down. Option 1 is to pay the liability in full. So let's say, for example, the IRS says, okay, you filed your taxes, you owe us $4,000. You can either pay that $4,000 in full, then you can start the pre-approval process. You say, well, Calvin, I don't want to do that. Don't worry, there's option 2. Option 2 is you could be on a payment plan for 3 months. And after that third payment has been made, so let's say your payment is due on the 5th. After that payment has been made on the 5th, you can start the pre-approval process either right after that payment is made on the 5th or the next day, which is the 6th. You can start that process. Now you say, well, Calvin, what if I didn't file taxes for the past few years and I still end up with a liability. Can I still use that income? Absolutely. But you still must follow those same steps, either paying the liability in full or getting on a payment plan for 3 months. And then after the third payment's made, then you can start the pre-approval process. Okay. So again, if you got questions about this, leave them in the comments below. So I'll give you guys an example here. One of our clients, he's a barber. Okay. And he makes good money. He wanted to buy a house, which, by the way, his credit score was not there at the time. So we sent him to our sister company, which is 850 Club. They looked at his credit report. They then gave him a custom game plan. He followed it to the T, and then he got the score he needed to go into home ownership. So now the score is taken care of. Shout out to 850 Club. Now that happened. Now he says, okay, now the next thing is, what's the income looking like? He normally has a lower net income, right? Again, a lot of self-employed people do this, not giving people advice, just telling you what I see. But when you do this, now here we have an issue. He normally has a lower net income of typically about $30,000. Okay. The problem is that that's not two problems. One, that doesn't give him enough money to buy the house that he wanted. We'll tell you that in a second. But number two, he did that because he didn't want to have to pay a certain amount in taxes. We get that. We know that. Okay. But here's the thing. The house that he wanted was $300,000. Now, luckily, this was towards the end of the year. So we were just going to wait until the next the next year, which is only a couple of months. It was like in November or something like that. And then we waited until the beginning of the new year. Then we said, okay, if you want to buy a $300,000 house and your year one was $30,000, we now have to show an average net income of about $60,000. Okay. But he makes a good amount of money to where the average came out because we needed to be at about 60,000. So he reported enough income for the second year for the average to come out to about $60,000 in net income. You guys know what problem we have now. We solved one problem, which was getting the net income needed to get the buying power. We solved that issue. Here's the problem, though. You already know what I'm talking about. The tax liability has arisen, right? So now with him showing $60,000 of net income, now he has a tax liability. He had a tax liability of about $10,000. He had the same options that I just told you. He can either pay that $10,000 in full or he can get on the payment plan. There's nothing wrong with the payment plan, let me be clear, but you cannot start the pre-approval process until after that third payment is made. So he says, well, I don't want to wait. Let me go ahead and pay off this tax liability. So he paid the $10,000 tax liability, and now he is a homeowner. As a matter of fact, I want to show you guys just so we can kind of put an image next to it. And as you can see here, he was able to get the house that he wanted. Okay. So that's he and his wife there, and they got the house. Okay. Now, of course, this is going to be a shameless plug here, just in case you're looking to buy a house in Illinois. Park Place Realty, 5 stars, 119 Google reviews. All right. But either way, now that we got that out the way, but I wanted to show you guys that was his story. And it was, hey, I want to buy a house. I want to buy this type of house. What do I need to do? Right. So we showed him exactly what he need to do to get his credit improved. We showed him exactly what he need to do to get the numbers right. And now he is a homeowner, guys. And that's how you buy a home if you're self-employed. Okay. So let's go ahead and go into some questions. I know you guys got some questions and such. And by the way, if you guys like this video, like it. If you want to share it, share it. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel, Easy Homeowner on YouTube as well. If you think this video was great, then we can't wait to see you at the next video. Okay, guys. All right. So now, any questions that anyone has, put your comments down below. We'll keep an eye on them when we can, and then we'll go from there. Make sure you guys don't be stingy. Let people know about this group. We're going to be most definitely getting everybody in position to go into homeownership, no matter what state that you're living in. Okay. We want to make sure we put everyone in position, get those questions answered so you can buy a home in 2024. All right. Thank you so much for watching this video, and we'll see you guys next week as we have our next topic. Have a good one.